Hello everybody, it's Malcolm Hawker and I'm here with another episode of Profisee's MDM Bytes. Today we're going to talk about data sharing. One of the reasons why we're talking about data sharing is because recently Gartner published their top trends in data and analytics, and data sharing was one of them, which means that it's part of the Gartner hype cycle. Which means that we can expect a lot of hype in this space. And that's partially why I'm having this discussion today, is to start, maybe perhaps cutting through some of the hype. Data sharing can drive a ton of value for organizations. This is a very, very good thing. That's an exciting thing. I see some really interesting applications down the road, particularly when we start talking about blockchain and a few other things. Separate post to separate content. But when we were speaking specifically about data sharing, I think a great way to think about this is really the creation of network effects, right? And honestly, MDM is kind of the master data management is kind of the quintessential, to me, example of this, of how do we pull data from multiple sources and drive insight and value that wouldn't have been present in a single source or in a single department or a single division. How do we break silos, put data together, whether that's physically or virtually, doesn't matter, but look at the data consistently across a consistent lens to create, kind of metaphorically speaking, a 2 + 2 = 5, right? How do we create value that otherwise wouldn't be there? And if you ask me, this is a network effect. This is what we can do with data sharing, and the more people or groups or sources or tables that are contributing to those views, the more value that you can drive. One thing to think about, and just kind of keep this in the back of your mind, is that right now, data sharing is very, very poorly defined. It means just about everything to all people, which is really not helping when it comes to helping cut through some of that hype. Data sharing includes everything from data monetization, selling data, so that's cool and that's good. Kind of the data as a product thing, that's good. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other is like data for good and kind of more charitable forms of sharing of data. Maybe even like government agencies that are creating data sources that can be used to help optimize crop yields or weather patterns or whatever that is. So that's two ends of the spectrum. And then there's another two ends, which is inter-company sharing outside of your four walls, and even intra-company sharing, like just classic MDM type use cases where we're sharing across departments or division or sources. So in between all of those kind of vectors, that leaves a lot of room for hype, a lot of room for conjecture about what is and what isn't data sharing. So those are examples of why there's so much hype right now, is because it's just really poorly defined. And this is something that I'm going to be working on as I create additional content here, is to put a little more structure around what I think data sharing really is and what isn't, because we as an industry most certainly need that specificity. As long as the data sharing definition is murky, which it is, and as long as there's hype, which there is, that means that there's going to be a lot of vendors out there saying they do this, right? And, I would argue that, building a data warehouse and then slapping some permissions or access rules on top of the data warehouse is a very basic, very, very basic form of data sharing that I would argue would drive limited, not zero, but limited value to an organization. When you start talking about kind of the true kind of, exponential effects that can come when we create sharing networks, I think there are a few capabilities that need to be there that for a lot of these vendors are not there. A lot of those capabilities actually do align to MDM. When we look at the textbook definition of MDM, or at least Gartner's definition of MDM, the word shared, is there. MDM is about the management and care and feeding of a company's shared data assets, right? So when I think about data sharing and technologies that need to support kind of the ability to realize, the network effects here, you would necessarily need to include some notion of governance, right? Some notion of maybe including like some sort of instruction book with your data product that said, here's the definition of the data, here's how it was sourced, here are the quality rules that go into creating the data, here are the business rules that can be used by your organization should you choose to align to those business rules. I would argue that a lot of data marketplace type initiatives in the past have failed because they just kind of, companies just shot out a lot of data in the hopes that the consumers of that data would be able to make sense of it and that would be fit for their purpose, right? And that they'd be able to use that data effectively and drive business decisions with it. When so often what we see is that one company's view of the world is not the same as another company's view of the world. And if those views don't align, or if you don't understand why what you're seeing, what the rules were in creating a data set, you're going to struggle to get a lot of value out of that. So I would argue that a data sharing platform includes some notion of creating and managing shared governance rules, shared governance policy, maybe even things like data stewardship, so that if somebody consuming the data where you need to adapt it or conform it to your rules. Maybe you are buying data about a hierarchy of something and it doesn't fully align to your hierarchy of that same data, that maybe you need to apply some stewardship to it. So look for some more content from me here on this, likely in the form of some sort of white paper to talk about what I view are the critical capabilities of a sharing platform. Because honestly, just wiring the plumbing, wiring two sources together, or a contributor and a consumer, and saying, poof, there you go, this is data sharing. Well, I guess given that data sharing is poorly defined today, I guess you could say that is enabling data sharing, but the value realization there is going to be very, very limited. So it's my goal here over the coming months, as I record this in August of 2022, to add a lot more specificity here, a lot more insight around what I think we should be thinking of data sharing, and what are some of the critical capabilities that would go into creating some form of a sharing platform. Other things to think about. Lastly, one thing to keep in mind here is that data sharing is certainly not new. It's been around actually quite a long time. There are a lot of data consortiums that have existed for a long time. The ability to scan a grocery item as you're checking out at your local grocery store or online, those UPC codes are a result of data sharing. A lot of the consistency around product labeling and product descriptions are created through consortium type networks. Credit scoring, most certainly, whether you're talking about commercial credit or personal credit, is a result of organizations sharing data. Sharing data about whether somebody is paying their bills or not paying their bills, or their credit history, are they credit worthy or not. These are a result. Credit scores are most certainly as a result of data sharing. And the list of other examples here is very, very long. Reference data sets are created through some form of sharing, and shared governance most certainly. So there are examples of this working, and these network effects driving fantastic value for organizations. I think we can expect to see a lot more of this in the coming future. Obviously, Gartner thinks the same as I do here. I think there are some very, very exciting applications of widespread data sharing down the road, particularly in the governance space and in the MDM space. Why would we be stewarding the same data over and over and over and over again at organizations if we could steward that once instead of 5,000 times, particularly for data that is arguably fairly commoditized, where data is being used widely? If you can find it on the internet, or if it's in the white pages of a telephone book, is it really that incredibly valuable? But yet still companies continue to steward and manage that data the same way over and over and over again. And maybe we could create some sort of shared governance or shared stewardship type models through a sharing kind of infrastructure that would create incredible network effects there, so we didn't have to steward the same data over and over and over again. That's just one example of a use case of a network effect that could be created by more widespread sharing of data and more widespread management of shared governance rules. Yes, there's a long way to go before we get to that, and most certainly probably what you're saying is that, Malcolm, that sounds cool, but I can't do that. Legal won't let me do that. Separate issue. There are most certainly legal issues here, and PII issues and other kind of regulatory and compliance constraints that need to be considered here. But I would still argue there are a lot of exciting things to come down the road from more widespread sharing of data. So a few things to think about. I hope you found this interesting and maybe even a little bit entertaining. I look forward to sharing more insights around data sharing and other best practices and tips and tricks through additional MDM Bytes in the future. Thanks, guys.